All right, welcome back to another episode here, Persuasion by the Pint. Jonathan Taylor.
Sean McCool.
And beer.
Beer.
All right, let's get started. Let's just forget our topic. We're just going to jump right in. What are we having today?
This is your call. This was yours. Looks like it's Einstök Olgerd. Very Icelandic toasted porter. So yeah, can't tell what that second name is. Einstök.
Yeah, I looked at that earlier. So here, I'll pull
It's very intimidating. He's got a big Viking or guy on the front of the thing. It's very different from the Duncan colors that
yes,
this is black.
This is very
blue gray. Very.
You know, we're gonna mention a tribute to Stan Lee because we're talking about stories today.
Yes,
and this kind of reminds me of Thor. So we got
there
Thor.
Go. Good tie-in. Good save. As I was rambling over here.
So let me just read. It says clear notes of toffee and dark chocolate. This porter is roasty and rich, offering a medium body that is robust yet smooth. On the palate, toasted chocolate malts give it a sinister black color.
Ooh.
Sinister. But it's easy to drink. Taste will have you believing there's no need to be afraid of the dark.
All right, so when you talk about sinister, dark color, and then I'm going to put it in my mouth, it makes me start thinking of the movie that's out right now, which is Venom.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
so let's,
sinister.
Let's give that a sip.
So this is actually our first taste of it. Thoughts?
I don't know.
We're totally honest on this.
Like this is like, like there's almost nothing, but then there's this aftertaste that kind of kicks in.
Yeah,
it's definitely a toasted something.
It wasn't the taste I was expecting.
No,
after reading that
it's
description,
not like super. It's not like a porter that I like. I think I like a little sweeter porter.
Yeah, and I was expecting that when it said the chocolate and the toffee, but I don't. There's not a lot of sweetness in that.
This may be one of those porters that requires a little airtime.
Sure,
you know, some of them they have to kind of sit in the glass and get some air and stuff like that, or that they get better with as you sip them. Like there's one that I like called Sweet Baby Jesus. That's kind of a peanut butter porter type thing. But if you drink it, like as soon as you open it, pour it in a glass and drink it, it's not that great.
Yeah.
But if you wait like 10 minutes and just let it sit, it gets better for some reason. Like even if you don't sip it. Like
we'll give this time.
So we'll give this a little bit of time. But right now I'm not a fan.
We'll follow up near the end just to let you know.
This would have to be a third beer to get the taste right.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
It's not like a starter beer because it just doesn't have the flavor.
Let's see. Food pairings recommended. Rich and roasty notes bring out the best of steak, lamb chops, game and roast. Works great as a base for sauces, marinades. Perfect finish with chocolate and cigars.
I could see that as a base for some like a roast in a crock pot.
Yep.
That'd be cool.
Yep. Maybe.
I was hoping you were going to say you had steak on the way, but if we were talking food pairings, but the door is remaining closed as I look towards the door. So,
SEC championship, there will be steaks on the grill over here.
All right.
Keep that in mind.
Yes.
That's going to be a big fun day for us. So
stories.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, we had this week Stan Lee passed away, which was it's kind of shocking. The guy was 95, but wow, what an icon!
Yeah,
when
I read
it comes
that
to.
He's 95, and like I was like,
didn't see it.
I thought he was like 80.
Yeah.
I mean, the way he shows up on appearances on TV and other stuff, I was like, oh.
Yeah, for a 95-year-old, I mean, as many appearances.
And still be working, and
yeah,
I think that's cool.
The cameos. I mean, I think he made a cameo in just about every Marvel movie they ever made.
Yeah, they're gonna have to CGI him in from now on, so they don't have a curse or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's I read a book last year, and the title of it doesn't come to mind. You may know the title, but it has to do with the history of Marvel as a business, the way he started it. And I'll that book will come to mind hopefully before the end of the show, and I'll be able to let you know. But it's fascinating about the early days of comics, and we go, this goes back to the early '60s when comics were starting to. Well, actually, probably a little before that, because there was a time where comics were ultra popular back in the the late '60s, '70s, probably into the early '80s.
Right.
But prior to that, they were looked at as just,
kid stuff.
Yeah, kid stuff. Adults didn't get into it. They were not taken very seriously.
Right.
If you were a comic book writer or artist, you were kind of,
sorry.
Yeah. But they got
Maybe
really
you'll do
popular.
better next year.
Yeah, exactly. But it was really interesting because a lot of the story it's featured. It centers around the life of Stan Lee and his rise through the comics, and all the way up to where some of the legal battles that he had when it came to his own creations becoming movies themselves. It was interesting, some of the hot legal battles that took place over the rights. So
I did read an article this week because a lot of people are writing articles around that because it's a hot topic, and where he talked about how, and I'm sure this was they probably got it from the book. They talked about how Stan Lee was really the first one to start bringing adult issues into the comic book characters. Right. So like Spider-Man, and if I'm not a comic book guy, I like the movies, but I'm not a diehard comic. So if I get the storylines wrong, I apologize to those of you who are in that world. But he talked about, like having a hard time paying the rent, as opposed to just superpower and being able to fly. Right. So started in relationship troubles, and Superman starts to have relationship issues with Lois Lane and keeping all that in like those types of things were a big part of what Stan Lee brought to the industry that made it more human, more adult, and really just more, I think, more believable. And really it goes, but that idea really goes back hundreds of years to the the hero's journey and Odysseus and all that stuff. I mean, it's that flaw.
The fatal flaw in what the hero always, unlike, like you mentioned, Superman, he's always thought to be, the perfect hero, know, whereas, Stan Lee brought these heroes that had faults to them. They had problems, they had faults, they had other sides to them that weren't so great. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that when I wrote copy, one of the terms that we use in copy all the time is called the Achilles Heel. And when I had clients, a lot of them did not want to use the Achilles Heel, but it's a very powerful idea, which is you want to admit a flaw, like a minor flaw in your product or your service, so that you seem human and not perfect.
Absolutely, people
so
want to see
go
that.
ahead and admit something that's not detrimental to your product or service. But it lets them know that it kind of builds
they trust you from that point on, because they feel like you've revealed something that's a weakness of yours. So they're like, well, he can't be hiding anything. He just opened up about.
Right. And if you package that in the form of a story, then it comes off really, powerfully and kind of a soft. It's not just like, oh, we can't figure out this thing, or, like whatever.
Yeah.
But if you package it in a story, it's much, much more powerful. I'll give you an example. So one of my clients was a B2B. They sold all the tooling and supplies for people who make granite countertops. So they sold the saw blades and the routers and the polishing pads and all the stuff that you would use. Because believe it or not, like granite doesn't come out of the ground shiny like you see in your kitchen.
Flat, perfect
squares and curves and everything. So they have this router that they sell. And when I first went to work, when they first hired me to rewrite a lot of their stuff was very just factual. It's 4.3 horsepower, blah, 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 blah. It was all just features, but no benefits, no story, no nothing. So I was asking them about this router, which, it's what makes the edge on your countertops, whether it's curved or bull-nosed or whatever. So I was talking to the guys like, why do y'all sell this one? Why is this the best-selling router? And he's like, well, it's interesting because we also service these routers. And so if people have problems, because, you know, when you're carving stone, it's pretty rough on equipment.
Yep.
So people would send these back, and my client had a person that was dedicated to fixing these routers, and then they would send them back to the client. You know, so they would get parts and this kind of stuff. Well, because my client is a distributor, the manufacturer's reps would come in all the time too. So they would sit down with the guy who was repairing this, and he would tell the repair guy would tell the manufacturer, hey, you could be, if you put a stainless steel bushing here instead of a rubber thing,
right,
it would make this a lot stronger and make it last longer, and we wouldn't have to repair it.
Right.
And we wouldn't have to send you the bill for the warranty stuff and all that kind of stuff. Well, turns out that over a course of like 4 or 5 years, the manufacturer actually made like, at the time that I wrote the ad, 21 upgrades that were directly contributed to this repair guy's stuff. So I wrote a story about, I think the headline was something like 21 upgrades and counting, thanks to this guy's name. I don't want to say it here, but
that's awesome.
So I told the story of this repair guy in a warehouse, you know, doing his business, and he would send the repairs in, and now this router is the best router in the industry because, you know, the manufacturer was open enough to listen to the repair guy. So it made the manufacturer look good. It made the client look good because they repair stuff, and it made the router look good. And it was all wrapped up in a story. This was like a space ad that went in trade journals. So it was a 1-page tight piece of copy, and it did really well. Like, he became like this little mini celebrity. Like, is he real? Like, is that guy really? And I'm like, yeah, he's the real deal.
Wow, that's
so
pretty
just, you know, little things like that. You can find stories.
Oh, sure.
Everywhere if you're just open and looking for them. They don't have to be these big stories.
Yeah, a story like that really, people can. It's very relatable. People can see a guy, you know, that's just, you know, has a passion for what he does, you know, just trying to bring this to the attention. You know, he's there giving feedback.
And it's so subtle because it hits so many points, right? I mean, like I said, it puts the manufacturer in a good light because they're willing to listen.
Absolutely.
It puts the, you know,
which a lot of times is not the case.
Right.
I mean,
It's usually the opposite.
a lot of manufacturers like, you know, what do you know? You know,
and
that's not what our research shows, and blah blah blah. You know, forget you.
Yeah. So I mean, it was in. I mean, I wrote that probably 6-7 years ago, and they still use it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just you know, we update it a little bit every once in a while.
That's really cool.
So there are places like that all the time. So let's talk a little bit about story, a little bit more broadly about story, and then I think we should. I'll get into some ways to find the stories.
Find
stories. Come back to that.
So let's start with the what every good story needs. There's two, and they don't have to be. You have to have a character that's the we call the protagonist,
the good guy,
the hero. We often use the term hero of the story. He's the guy that we're typically rooting for, and then you have the antagonist, which is the one that's rooting against him or trying to thwart his every move to get to where he's trying to get. And it's not always. I mean, we oftentimes think of the most obvious, like Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. You know, that's an easy one when we're thinking about protagonists and antagonists. But sometimes it's not. The antagonist isn't always a person or a being. It could be a situation or an obstacle that the protagonist.
If I remember correctly from English lit, there's man versus man, man versus nature.
Yep.
I think there's a third one. I don't remember what it is, but
man versus nature, man versus
maybe man versus self, like coming of age.
Yeah, that's true.
I think those are like the three. There's several books out that are like, you know, some people say there's really only 3 plot lines to a story. Some people say there's like 7. Some people say there's 13.
Yep.
I've got a couple of there's actually books you get on Amazon. Like, I think I have one called 13 Master Plots, and it kind of goes over the big stories and their arcs and everything like that.
Yeah.
But all of them have that character of some kind, even if it's not a human character, even if it's an event.
Right.
An event can be the lead character.
Yeah.
like World War II can be a character in a story if it's set up correctly.
Yep, absolutely.
So you need a character, and like in my case, we had, the router wasn't a character. I mean, he was a character, but it was not the character. The repairman was the guy.
Right.
Like he was the main guy.
He was the hero.
Right. And the obstacle was this machine's not working quite right. And there really wasn't, the only antagonist in that is that just things break and they get worn out over time. But it wasn't the manufacturer, it wasn't anything else. It was just, that would be kind of, I guess, a man versus nature type thing. It's just what happens.
Right.
And then how are you going to deal with it?
Yeah.
So
in that there are stages that, and we can talk about that, there are stages that in this story that we're referring to, and then just about any story that you have the hero, you have the antagonist. And so the stages start with the hero starts out, he faces difficulty. What we were talking about, the stages, the rise. Yeah.
And then we've got the conflict. And then we've got kind of so if you think of it like a bell curve, right? So you've got the rise of the character, like you really get attached, and then you have this huge conflict where it's a moral dilemma, it's a big fight, it's something. And then usually what happens if it's a good story is they kind of go backwards and they start to go downhill, and you kind of lose some respect for them, or whatever. And then they redeem themselves, and they come out okay, right? I mean, that's basically how it was. So it's not a full bell curve; it's kind of an up and then a halfway back down, and then it goes back up.
Yep.
Typical, and that's a typical. If you do any reading around 3-act plays, that's a 3-act play.
Yep.
I mean, Shakespeare was famous for 3-act plays.
Yeah.
And most movies kind of follow that.
Yeah.
That arc in one way or another.
You mentioned Spider-Man.
Yeah.
He gains his power. There's a rise. His uncle dies or shot. That was kind of a thing. There were probably some.
There's this revenge. Yeah, there's going to be little things that you start adding in the wrinkles. But if you were to sketch it out, your rough draft would be this big curve, and then as you go back and put in details and add in details, you get a little bit more arcs and things like that. But his first, Spider-Man's first idea was revenge. Yeah. Right. And then he remembers what the virtue kicks in. Yeah. And remembers what his uncle said. Now he's fighting for good. Yeah. But then he's got all these other things going on. He can't keep a girlfriend. He can't pay his rent. All this stuff. Yeah. That makes him human.
And those can be seen as all antagonists, which you don't always have to, there's a fight against, paying the bills. There's a fight against keeping your identity hidden, that people are always trying to find out who is Spider-Man, Right.
So how do we use, so that's kind of the big picture, and I'm going to get into some like ways to start stories and find stories and things like that. But can you think of in your life, in your sales career, how do you use stories to land a new client or sell a new product? Or, I can think of some ideas, but
usually when I do use stories because they're very powerful, and it's typically we'll use stories related to using the hero, being, other customers, other clients that I've worked with and where they were. So, this particular company, XYZ company being the hero, where they were, some of the struggles they were facing, some of the things that they were doing wrong, generally speaking. And then you come in and basically lay out a plan or blueprint for them on how, how they can, reduce their cost, increase their production, and those are general. There's a lot of specifics within that, but those are general ideas of how, and then obviously the protagonist, after overcoming, you show how you helped this hero overcome, this situation and rise.
Yeah. So I think, there's, I guess I heard this today on the audiobook I was listening to. The wrinkle in here is, and a lot of times in a hero's type story, there's a hero's mentor.
Yeah.
So what's going on. Thinking first of all, you have to know how to frame that overall story, right?
Right.
So you do that with a customer's experience, right? They're the hero and stuff. But I think what I'm hearing you say is that there's a
mentor involved.
There's your product, or you as the salesperson become the mentor to that hero, right? So you're the Yoda to Luke Skywalker, or your product is the Yoda to the Luke Skywalker, that gets them over the hump when they didn't know what else to do.
Absolutely.
They couldn't get the X-Wing fighter out of the swamp.
Right.
Like, you're like, there is no do.
Seek me,
no
you
try.
must.
Just do.
There's only, and that's why, you could call it, obviously it's like, people use consultative selling, things like that. But you can, if you're not using that in a story format, when you're describing it, and you really, when you craft stories, you really have to really sit down and work on them beforehand. You're not thinking this on the fly, but you're actually, when you're crafting a story out, you really need to sit down and plan it before you go in. If you're doing a presentation, as a writer, obviously that's, those are imperative in your copy.
Yeah, because some of those little details can make all the difference in the depth of the story and things like that. And otherwise, when you're doing consultative selling, if you never use story, it just comes across as like badgering the witness.
Right.
Like where you're just firing questions at somebody.
Yep.
And it can be very uncomfortable for that person. Whereas if you're telling a story and you, well, that's just odd.
That is odd.
Live recording there. So,
talking about stories.
There's a story to tell your grandkids.
This is an antagonist right here.
We just move on and overcome. No need to edit that out. So yeah, I think the important thing is just to understand the overall arc of the story, and then start filling in your details depending on what kind of story you're trying to tell, who you're trying to sell, who you're trying to persuade, who you're trying to influence. All those things, you want to take your audience into account for those things.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that side-by-side comparison of Star Wars and Harry Potter?
No.
Where it's like the structure of the story, and literally it's like they're kind of showing like a one-page synopsis of Luke Skywalker. He's in the desert, he's adopted by his uncle, blah, 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 all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then they show Harry Potter, and they basically have taken the exact same words and they've scratched out and they've just changed the names and the locations.
Yeah.
And it's the same exact story.
Wow.
And I think that's a great example of like learn the framework of a good story.
Don't try to deviate or change because
they're proven.
They're proven. They've been used time and time again.
Just figure out how to put your product or your service or yourself. You got to put your client in there as well.
Yeah.
But you can show how you're the mentor, or you can put yourself in any one of those positions. Obviously, not the antagonist.
Sure.
But you can either be the hero or you can be the mentor to the hero. So you could make your client the hero by kind of foreshadowing what's going to happen when they do business with you, and create this story arc of here they are now, and this is the journey they're going to go through. They're about to land a big client, but this thing comes up. They don't have the right packaging.
Yeah.
So you come in, and you can tell that through another client.
Right.
But what we all do when we see a good hero story is we put ourselves in the hero's shoes.
Sure.
It's just natural. That's just what. Unless you're a psychopath, then you put yourself in the antagonist's shoes. Then you're Loki instead of Thor. If that's you, then don't listen to this show anymore.
Exactly.
You're not going to use this for the right reasons. So, but learning and I think that's why was it Eugene Schwartz or I think it was Eugene Schwartz. I saw a video of him talking to Phillips Publishing 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And he said, and I think I mentioned this on another episode, but he said, you should go and see every movie that does $100 million or more at the box office.
Yeah.
And you should be reading the National Enquirer. And now it's probably Us Weekly or something else, but you should be reading those things, like not constantly, but you should be reading those to get a pulse of America in general, right? Don't get so bogged down into it. You don't have to watch the news all the time, but you do need to be aware enough that you kind of understand the big cultural shifts that are going on and be able to place yourself or your product or your service kind of in that as the hero or whatever. So, but if for no other reason, go see good movies to learn how to tell good stories.
I agree. I mean, you can learn a lot just in your writing, in your sales copy, in your presentation by, just taking some notes from a really good movie, a really good story.
Yeah.
Stories are very, we think about the examples of stories that persuade. You can go to the Bible. What did Jesus do? He didn't just lay it out, in a PowerPoint or a bullet point. He told parables, and he gave some really good stories that some missed the point, but some obviously it's like
And that's a great point. I mean, that's a little. Not everybody's going to get it.
Yeah.
Like not everybody is your market.
Yeah.
But the ones that are will really respond to a story.
Yeah.
And some will think that's the stupidest story they've ever heard.
Right.
They're going to give it.
And they're not.
They're going to get it. It's going to be a 14 on Rotten Tomatoes instead of a 93.
Yeah.
Right. Because they just don't get it.
Yeah.
Because that's not the pain they're in. They don't understand. So let's.
I'm going to hit on a few points real quick from a standpoint of stories in business and marketing.
Yeah.
I wrote down a few things that just kind of came to mind. I guess when you're creating or when you're creating a story within your business, what you're looking at is if you're working with a client and you work with coaching clients, you're doing life coaching, you're helping them achieve some of their goals. I wrote down, what does the protagonist or the hero in the story, what do they desire? What's their main goal? And it's not like, what do they want? I mean, what is their heart's desire? What are they really trying to achieve? Two, what is hindering them from achieving this? How will he or she act in order to achieve this desire? So you have to understand, that's how you, in crafting a story, you want to start with ultimately, what's the main goal of the hero? Where do they want to go? What's the ultimate goal that you're helping them get to? So,
yeah. And, I have a kind of one way that I help people see that is I help them find a thread in their life that they can kind of see, the backstory, if you will. So one of the first exercises I have clients do is this timeline of their life up to this point, from birth up to now, where literally I have them draw a timeline on a piece of poster board, preferably with like crayons and markers to get out of their head a little bit. And they draw this timeline and they put like low points and high points. So, 2 years old, like for instance, my story, 2 years old, parents get divorced. I don't really remember it, but obviously that's a major kind of a negative thing that happened in my life. And I put a big kind of negative. Yeah. If I had a scale of 1 to 10, up is positive and 0 to 10, down is negative.
Yeah.
I would have my line across horizontally, and then vertically I would go where I thought that was on the negative or positive scale, right? So, moving to a new town might be a negative or a positive depending on what it was. And I have people plot this out, and at least, first you hit the big points, and then you kind of start, as you start thinking about it, you'll start thinking about these other points. And then what we do is we just look at okay, who are you then and who are you now? And if there was one lesson that you've learned from the ups and the downs, like if there's one constant kind of lesson that has gone through your head, what would it be? And that becomes their story. And then everything starts to make sense in the context of that story. You can see how even this bad thing, the Bible, again, in Joseph's stories, what you meant for evil, God meant for good.
Absolutely.
Right? So he was thrown in a well, he was in jail, blah, blah, blah. He was accused of, by Potiphar's wife, and like all these negatives, but it made him who he was, and it put him in this position to now save his family and save Egypt and all this stuff. And when you can stand back and look at it with where you are now, it's very hard to see it when you're in it. But you can start crafting that story. And I think you have to be willing to do that with your product or service, or if you have a client that you right for, or whatever. You have to take the good and the bad and create a narrative out of both. Because people, especially in today's media,
right,
social media, all information's out there on the internet.
Yep.
Like, if you don't take into account and tell the narrative of the bad with the good,
they don't trust you.
They don't trust you, and they're going to find the bad anyway, and they're going to say, "Oh, you were hiding this."
Yeah.
But you can make it part of your story. Like Apple, part of their story now is that Steve Jobs got fired from Apple, and he came back with all this new insight because he had been working at Pixar and all this other stuff, and he brought this whole new fresh approach. That is now part of their company, story that it's just not the same without it. Like that's like a special part of their story. The board fired the CEO and the guy who founded it, and he comes back, the White Knight,
rescues
years later.
It. Yeah, I mean, when they were
that's
sinking, they were like the Titanic going down. And
I think 25, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, people would hide that kind of stuff. But I think we're in a different place in society now where people, where vulnerability with, Brene Brown and some of the books she's written has really helped, that like, that's okay to tell that in your story.
Yeah.
So whether it's a 25-year story or a 6-month story or a week-long story, it's okay to let those negatives shine through. Yeah. As long as you can show how it played out and ended well. Nobody wants to join you in a story that is in the middle of chaos. Like, like if it hasn't played out yet,
they want to see that you're on the flip side, on the other side.
I mean, we want to see the happily ever after. Right or wrong, and even though that's not how life actually is, when people are making a buying decision, they want to see happily ever after.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to craft your whole narrative. Yeah. As good as you can based on where you are, and where you're
showing vulnerabilities. Yeah, I think is very important. And you see you see a trend today. You look at the 1950 hero is a whole lot different than the 2018 hero.
Oh yeah.
The 1950 hero was like,
polished,
spit shine, nothing perfect. He's like the Christopher Reeve Superman, just, perfect. But today's hero is a lot, it's full of, troubles, problems, I think of like, I'm wearing my Punisher T-shirt in honor of Stanley, and that's a character that's got some problems too, because you think of quite a few. You watch the and there's been movies, and then there's a Netflix series on that. But this is a guy that obviously he's gone through the ringer with losing family, and he's not your white knight that you would say. He's ultimately the hero, but he's also got a dark side to him. So
I think a lot of our favorite superheroes today do have that.
Yeah.
The Equalizer comes to mind.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I
haven't watched the second one yet. I don't know if it's as good as the first one.
I don't think I've seen that one either, but
okay.
I love the old TV show, but there's definitely more depth to the characters now and their backstory and their pain and all that kind of stuff. That's really good.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to, and like we've been saying this whole episode, I think there's a lot to learn from that when it comes to persuasion and influencing people to our ideas, to our products and services. Right. Like that actually, in a weird way, comforts people and lets them know you're okay.
Yeah.
Because I actually posted this on Facebook today. I was like, people are incredibly fragile.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like you have no idea how scared and fragile most people are in their world.
Yeah.
I know I am. And, day to day, there's always doubts. There's always stuff. So if they can see that you're human and that you have a solution, that you've kind of come through. One of my mentors, he would always, when he was talking about coaches selling their services and things like that, he's like, you don't have to be perfect. Like he used this metaphor that I thought was great. We talked about metaphors the last show, analogies, metaphors. He would always say, imagine you were in a plane and it crashed in the river, and so everybody's in chaos. You swim your way to shore, and you're on the shore and you're safe. then there's a person right behind you who's still in the water, not quite safe yet.
Right.
If you just reach down and help them, you're a hero.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't have to be cleaned up and showered,
right,
come back in an ambulance, the whole bit. Like, they just need you right then.
They just need you right then.
You're one step ahead of them. You've got the solution from water to bank.
Yeah.
And that's all they need.
Yeah.
They may need another guru after that, but you have to be okay with your product or service or your point that you're trying to make, you know, if we're just talking persuasion, influence in general, of getting that person one step further.
Fulfilling that one immediate need.
Yeah. And you can do that in the form of story. I mean, you don't have to get them all the way down the road to a perfect life.
Yeah.
You just need to get them one more step.
Right.
And that's really all you have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Over promising the, you know, what you can do is a major pitfall that people can fall into. And
seems like the right thing to do, but it actually is,
it's
kind of counter to what you're trying to accomplish. So.
Yeah.
I think that's a good stopping point. I had some other stuff, but I think we can wrap it there and
carry it on to the next one.
That's more than enough to chew on, I think, for a while.
Yeah. So, has it gotten any better? So
I think it has. I mean, you obviously it has for you because yours is almost gone. So
I don't know if it's gotten any better or if I just, didn't
notice it.
Yeah, didn't notice it as much, but
it's kind
we've had better. We've had
kind of tasteless at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's got more of an aftertaste than it does in the front. So I probably wouldn't get it again.
No. So this is one that we'll be honest and forthright and say no. It's not worth your time.
Yeah. So Einstock Brewery or whoever this is, if you got something else you want to send, let us know.
Yeah, let us know. We'll be happy.
We're happy to change our mind on a different beer. But this one, not so great.
Yeah. Even though you have cool packaging, we like your Thor on the front, but that's about it. So, Well, thanks for listening. And again, you can find us persuasionbythepint.com as always. You can check out, our website continually gets evolved, so you can go, if you go to the site, you can check out some of the stuff that we recommend in terms of reading, recommended reading.
Yep. Products we'll be adding.
Yeah, products, including the podcast. We didn't mention on our last episode, but we'll be adding that here. We've got that posting to the show or posting to the webpage very shortly. Cool. You guys can find, if you're interested in starting a podcast, we'll have the link at the bottom of this episode and all of our episodes that you can find to check out. If you're interested in starting a podcast, great way to build persuasion is in creating your own content that you can deliver to your audience.
Absolutely.
So, thanks for listening. Till next time, have a great week.
See you.